They tried to keep in touch through messages and calls, but the distance, even for a short time, made the bond feel fragile. Small misunderstandings began to appear. A message left unanswered, a call missed. A casual remark misinterpreted, a lot of it, started to create tension between them. One evening, after a particularly long day for both of them, they met at the park bench where they had shared so many quiet conversations. The air was crisp, the sky tinged with orange and pink as the sun set. She was tired and frustrated. He could feel the tension radiating from her. "Something's bothering you," he said softly, not accusingly, just noticing. "I know," she replied, sighing. "It's just, everything feels overwhelming. Work, life. I don't know how to keep up sometimes." He nodded, understanding more than he could say. "I get it," he said. "I feel it too. And I worry that we're not giving each other enough attention because of it." The words hung between them, heavy with the truth neither wanted to admit. It was a moment of vulnerability, one that made both of them uncomfortable, yet it was necessary. For the first time, they faced the reality that love wasn't only about quiet moments and shared laughter, it also required effort, patience, and understanding. Especially when life became challenging, they began to talk openly about their fears, doubts, and insecurities. She admitted that she sometimes worried he wouldn't understand her, that he might leave when things became too complicated. He confessed that he feared failing her, that he might not be able to meet the expectations of a growing relationship while balancing his own responsibilities. The honesty was uncomfortable at first, but it became a turning point. They realized that their connection was not immune to life's pressures. But the very fact that they could talk about it, acknowledge it, and face it together made the bond stronger. Despite their efforts, misunderstandings continued to arise. One afternoon, she saw him talking to someone at a cafe, a friend. Nothing more, but her mind jumped to conclusions. She felt a surge of jealousy, a fear that she had not fully admitted to herself before. She didn't want to confront him immediately, unsure if her feelings were valid or if she was overreacting. He noticed her distance, the subtle change in her demeanor. He had no idea that a simple conversation with a friend had sparked insecurity. "Is something wrong?" he asked carefully, sitting beside her on the bench. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, it's nothing," she said, though her voice was uncertain. He reached out, taking her hand gently. "I want to understand," he said. "You don't have to explain if you're not ready. But I want to be here for you, no matter what." The reassurance helped, but it also highlighted the reality of love. Even the strongest connection could be tested by doubt, fear, and misunderstanding. They learned that trust was not just a feeling, it was a practice, something that required consistent effort, communication, and patience. There were moments when they considered stepping back, giving themselves space to breathe. Life felt complicated, and the pressures of work, travel, and personal responsibilities made it tempting to retreat into familiar routines, to avoid confronting the challenges of a deepening relationship. But each time they pulled away slightly, they realized how much they valued each other, how much the presence of the other person added meaning to their lives. One evening, during a quiet walk along a street lined with old trees, she stopped and looked at him with a mix of frustration and hope. "I don't want to lose what we have," she said softly. "Even when life gets hard, I don't want to lose it." He smiled gently, his eyes reflecting the same sentiment. "Neither do I," he said. "That's why we have to keep trying, keep being honest, and keep showing up for each other. Love isn't always easy, but it's worth it." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth. They realized that challenges were a natural part of life and love, and that the depth of their connection would be measured not by the absence of difficulty, but by their willingness to face it together as the days passed. They began to find ways to navigate the difficulties without losing the essence of what they had built. They learned to communicate more openly, to check in with each other regularly, and to offer support without judgment. Small gestures became more meaningful. A message during a busy day, a shared cup of coffee, a thoughtful note left on a desk. Each act reinforced the bond, showing that love could persist even in the face of challenges. Family expectations also added to the tension. Friends and relatives, while well-meaning, sometimes questioned their choices or expressed doubts about the future. Both of them felt the pressure to meet not only their own standards but also the expectations of those around them. It was stressful, and there were moments when they questioned whether they were doing the right thing. One weekend, while visiting a quiet bookstore together, they paused in front of a shelf filled with old journals. She picked one up and flipped through the pages, reading words that someone else had written years before. "It's strange," she said softly, "how people leave pieces of themselves behind in unexpected places." He nodded, smiling. "I think that's what we're doing too, in a way. Leaving little pieces of ourselves in each other's lives, even in the small moments." It was a moment of reflection, a reminder that despite the challenges, they were building something lasting. Love, they realized, wasn't just about joy and laughter, it was also about endurance, resilience, and the courage to stay connected even when life made it difficult. There were disagreements too. Small things that seemed trivial at first, plans that didn't align, different ways of approaching problems, minor misunderstandings, sometimes grew into arguments. But each disagreement became an opportunity to learn, to understand each other better, and to practice patience and empathy. They discovered that conflict, when handled with care, could strengthen their connection rather than weaken it. One rainy evening, as they sat together in the cafe watching the water race down the windows, she admitted a fear she had kept hidden. "I'm scared that I'll make mistakes, that I'll mess this up." "Shh," she said quietly. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "We both will," he replied. "But that's part of life, part of love. It's not about never making mistakes, it's about being willing to face them together, to grow together, and to keep trying." His words brought comfort, a sense of reassurance that despite the challenges, they were on the same path. They realized that love was not about perfection, but about persistence, understanding, and a willingness to stay connected through life's inevitable difficulties. As weeks turned into months, they found a rhythm in their relationship. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real. They celebrated small victories, like finishing a difficult project or resolving a misunderstanding. And they supported each other through setbacks and disappointments. Each challenge they faced became a shared experience, a testament to the strength of their bond and the depth of their commitment. One afternoon, they sat on a bench overlooking the city, the skyline glowing in the late afternoon sun. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "I never thought love could be like this," she said softly. He kissed the top of her head gently. "Neither did I," he said. "It's not always easy, but it's real, and that makes it worth everything." By the end of part 4, their love had been tested in ways neither expected. Work pressures, misunderstandings, distance, and personal fears all challenged the bond they had formed. Yet through honesty, communication, and persistent care, they managed to navigate the difficulties, learning that love was as much about endurance as it was about joy. They had discovered that real connection required patience, trust, and courage, and that facing challenges together could deepen a relationship in ways that easy moments never could. The story was no longer just about chance encounters or quiet conversations. It was about two people learning to face life together, to embrace vulnerability, and to build a love that could withstand obstacles. And though more challenges awaited, they had already proven to themselves that their connection was strong enough to endure, ready to grow even further in the moments to come. Time had passed, and the city had grown familiar to them, both in ways it never had before. Streets, cafes, and quiet corners were no longer just ordinary places. They had become markers of memories, small pieces of a journey they had shared. Each moment, from the first accidental meeting to the long walks in the park, had contributed to a bond that was deep, meaningful, and rare. Now, after weeks and months of connection, laughter, vulnerability, and even challenges, their relationship had reached a point of quiet certainty. It was a Saturday morning when she decided to take a walk through the small market near her apartment. The sun was warm, the air crisp, The streets were lively with the chatter of vendors and the smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee beans. She felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years, a sense that something in her life had shifted in a meaningful way. He had suggested meeting her at the market, a casual plan that had quickly become a routine they both enjoyed. She saw him approaching from the corner of her eye, his familiar, calm smile lighting up his face. Her heart quickened as she waved to him, and he walked toward her, matching her pace effortlessly. It was a typical morning in the city, with people hurrying through the streets, umbrellas bobbing in the light drizzle, and the hum of traffic filling the air. The young woman moved quickly, trying not to slip on the wet pavement. She was carrying a small tote bag over her shoulder, her coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. Her mind was crowded with thoughts about work, bills, and things she wished she could change about her life. She felt like she was running in circles, living the same routine day after day without any real excitement or joy. She entered a small cafe, one she had passed hundreds of times but never really noticed. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread made her pause for a moment, letting her mind drift away from the stress outside. She joined the short line, glancing around the room. The cafe wasn't crowded, but there were a few people sitting alone, absorbed in their own worlds. Some were working on laptops, some reading newspapers, and others just staring into their cups as if searching for answers in the foam of their sinos. At the counter, she hesitated for a second, unsure what to order. She usually went for the usual, but today, something made her want to try something new. She finally decided on a latte with a hint of caramel, hoping it might bring a small spark of pleasure to her otherwise ordinary morning as she waited for her drink. She noticed a man sitting alone at a table by the window. He was reading a book, completely focused, and occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. There was something about him that caught her attention, not in a way that was loud or dramatic, but subtle. He seemed calm, unbothered by the world rushing past him, and for some reason, that drew her eyes. She looked away quickly, feeling a little embarrassed for staring. But she couldn't help sneaking another glance. Her latte was ready, and she picked it up, balancing it carefully as she scanned the cafe for a place to sit. Every table seemed taken except for one small empty spot across from the man with the book. She hesitated. Normally, she wouldn't sit near strangers, but something about the peacefulness he carried made her want to be there, even if just for a few minutes. She walked over and asked softly, "Is this seat taken?" He looked up, slightly startled, and then smiled gently. "No, please, go ahead," he said. His voice was calm, kind, and somehow reassuring. She sat down, feeling a little shy, and placed her bag on the chair beside her. For a few moments, they didn't speak, each absorbed in their own thoughts. She sipped her latte, enjoying the warmth and sweetness, while he returned to his book. Then, without warning, her phone slipped from her hand and fell to the floor, hitting the corner of his notebook. The notebook tipped over, and papers scattered across the floor. She gasped, feeling embarrassed and flustered. "I'm so sorry," she said, kneeling to pick up the papers. "It's okay," he said calmly, crouching to help her. "No harm done." As they gathered the papers, their hands brushed slightly, and a small spark of awareness passed between them. Neither said anything, but there was a moment of quiet connection, like the world had slowed just for a second. She smiled awkwardly, holding a few sheets of paper in her hand. "Thanks for helping," she said. "I'm usually not this clumsy," he chuckled softly. "It happens to everyone," he replied. At least it wasn't something important. She noticed the book he had been reading. It wasn't something she would have picked up herself, but she felt a sudden curiosity. "What are you reading?" she asked, genuinely interested. He looked at her and smiled again, a little surprised that she had asked. "It's just a book on history, something I like to read when I have free time," he said. "It's not very exciting, I'm afraid." "It sounds interesting to me," she said. "I love learning new things, even if they're not always fun." They exchanged a few more words, talking about small things at first: the weather, the cafe, the city around them. Each word felt easy, natural, and there was no pressure, no awkward pauses that felt uncomfortable. For the first time that morning, she felt a little lighter, like the weight of her thoughts had lifted just enough to breathe freely. Eventually, she realized she needed to leave. She had work to get to, and a busy day ahead. She stood up, thanked him again, and started to gather her things. As she walked away, she felt a strange pull, an unusual feeling she couldn't explain. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a deep sense of connection that made her heart beat a little faster. He watched her leave, closing his notebook slowly. Something about her lingered in his mind, even though they had only exchanged a few words. There was a quiet fascination, a sense that this encounter was more than just chance. He shook his head slightly, as if to dismiss the thought. But it stayed with him anyway. For the rest of the day, she couldn't stop thinking about the man at the cafe. She remembered his calm demeanor, the way he smiled and the way he seemed genuinely interested in the world around him. She wondered if she would ever see him again. But she also tried to push the thought aside, focusing on work and responsibilities. Still, the memory of that brief connection brought a small, unexpected joy to her day. Meanwhile, he found himself revisiting the moment in his mind repeatedly. He thought about her laugh, the way she had apologized, and how her presence had made the cafe feel brighter, warmer. He realized that in a world full of routines and responsibilities, this small, accidental meeting had reminded him that life could still hold surprises. Days passed, and neither of them knew that fate had already begun weaving its threads. Life went on busy streets, long hours at work, and the usual routines, but the memory of that morning lingered quietly, like a soft echo in their minds. They didn't know each other's names yet, didn't know what the future held. But that moment had planted a seed, a tiny, hopeful spark that something new and meaningful could grow. She would sometimes catch herself glancing at the cafes she passed, half hoping, half imagining that he might be there. Each time she walked by, she remembered the warmth of his smile and the way the world had seemed a little slower, a little gentler in his presence. She didn't know why it affected her so much, but it did. And she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just experienced something rare and special. He, too, noticed small things in his routine that reminded him of her. A cup of coffee that tasted a little sweeter, the sight of a person juggling too many things at once. The quiet moments between the rush of daily life, each brought a flash of memory from that morning. He began wondering what it would be like to see her again, to speak more, to know her story as she would know his. Neither of them realized it yet. But that accidental meeting was the beginning of something that could change both of their lives. Life had a way of moving quickly, of hiding surprises in ordinary moments, and sometimes the smallest gestures, the handing of a notebook, a shared smile, a brief conversation could set the stage for the most meaningful connections. As the week went on, she found herself carrying a sense of anticipation she couldn't explain. She noticed the little things that made her life feel a bit dull before the gray mornings. The crowded streets, the endless tasks, and realized that even in ordinary days, there were opportunities for something extraordinary. And though she didn't know it yet, she was ready to open her heart to the unexpected. He, in his quiet way, also felt a shift. He realized that even in his routine life, filled with habits and predictable patterns, there was room for surprise, for chance, and for moments that could remind him of the beauty of human connection. That brief encounter in a small cafe had given him a glimpse of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of possibility, a quiet hope that life could surprise him in the best ways. And so, the story began not with a dramatic event, not with a sudden revelation, but with two ordinary people meeting by chance, sharing a small human moment, and unknowingly setting in motion a journey that neither of them could yet imagine. A journey that would test them, challenge them, and ultimately show them the power of connection, hope, and love in the most unexpected ways. In the heart of a busy city, amidst the hum of daily life, an ordinary morning had become extraordinary. A simple act of kindness, a shared smile, and the quiet presence of another person had changed the course of two lives forever. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important moments are the ones we almost miss, the ones that seem small at first but grow into something much bigger, and though they didn't know it yet. That cafe, that spilled notebook, and that brief conversation had planted the first seed of a love story that was about to unfold, a story full of surprises. challenges, laughter, and moments that would leave them forever changed. It was only the beginning, but already the world felt just a little brighter because of that encounter. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that rainy morning in the cafe stayed alive in both their minds. Neither of them knew what the other was thinking exactly, but a quiet curiosity had begun to grow. Life went on, as it always did, with routines, responsibilities, and the small stresses of daily existence. Yet somehow, everything seemed slightly different for them both. The world felt a little more open, a little more full of possibility. Because of that brief encounter, the young woman found herself taking small detours in her day, just to pass by the cafe. She didn't know why she was doing it, and she would sometimes scold herself for being foolish, for letting her mind wander into fantasies about someone she barely knew. But the pull was irresistible. She imagined him sitting at the same window table, immersed in his book, calm and thoughtful. She wondered if he would remember her, if he had thought about her even once since that day. One morning, she made the excuse of stopping by for a quick coffee before work. The rain had returned, light but persistent, and the streets glistened as the early sun tried to break through. She entered the cafe with a mixture of hope and hesitation. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, as if searching for a familiar face. And then, there he was, sitting at the same table, his book open, a small notebook beside him. He looked as calm and composed as ever, completely unaware of how much impact he had had on her thoughts over the past days. Her heart skipped a beat, but she reminded herself to act casual. She ordered her coffee and took the courage to sit at a table nearby, not directly across from him, but close enough that they could exchange glances. She tried to focus on her phone, scrolling through messages, but every few seconds, she found herself looking at him again. He noticed her almost immediately. Something in the way she moved, the slight tension in her posture, caught his attention. He looked up from his book, and their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither spoke. There was a flicker of recognition, of surprise, and then a small, knowing smile passed between them. It was quiet, subtle, but it carried a weight that neither could ignore. The young woman felt a flutter of nerves. She hadn't planned on speaking to him right away. She wasn't even sure what she would say, but as if reading her hesitation. He closed his book gently and walked over, holding his coffee. "Hi," he said softly, not too loud, not too casual, just the right tone. "It's good to see you again." "Hi," she replied, her voice a little shaky. "I didn't expect. It's nice to see you here." He smiled as if he understood exactly what she meant. "I guess some places just have a way of bringing people together," he said lightly. She laughed quietly, a sound that felt more relaxed than she had in days. "I suppose so." They didn't rush into a conversation. Instead, they talked about small things at first: the weather, the cafe, the new pastries that had arrived that morning. There was no awkwardness, no forced attempts at conversation. It was natural, easy, and comforting. Both of them realized how rare it was to feel this relaxed with someone they had just met. Over the next few weeks, chance continued to play its hand. They kept running into each other at unexpected places. A grocery store where she reached for the same carton of milk, a quiet park where he was sitting on a bench reading, and even at a subway station during their morning commute. Each encounter was brief, often just a smile or a few exchanged words, but each left a lingering warmth that neither could shake. One day, while walking through a small neighborhood park, they finally shared a longer conversation. The young woman was feeding some birds at a small pond, tossing crumbs with careful hands. He approached slowly, holding his coffee cup, and sat on the bench beside her. "You always seem to find the quiet spots in the city," he observed. Watching her scatter crumbs for the birds, she shrugged, smiling. "I guess I like places that feel a little peaceful, away from the chaos." He nodded, understanding. "I do too. That's why I come here sometimes. It's nice to escape, even if just for a little while." Began to talk more openly, sharing snippets of their lives without realizing how much they were revealing. She told him about her job, the challenges she faced, and small dreams she rarely shared with anyone. He spoke about his work, his love for reading, and small personal stories that made him who he was. There was no pressure, no expectation, Just two people learning about each other in a natural, unhurried way. One afternoon, as the sun set, casting a warm orange glow over the city, they found themselves walking along the same streets, side by side. There was a comfortable silence between them, punctuated by occasional laughter at small observations or shared jokes. She felt a strange sense of ease in his presence, as if she could be herself completely, without judgment or pretense. "Do you ever wonder about chance?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. He looked at her thoughtfully. "All the time. I think life has a way of bringing people together when they need it most, even if they don't realize it at the time." She smiled, feeling a connection that was deeper than words. "I think you might be right." From that day on, their encounters became more intentional. They started to seek each other out, even if just for a short conversation or a shared coffee. The city, once overwhelming and routine, now felt like a place full of possibilities. Every corner held a memory, every street a chance encounter, and every cafe a moment where life could surprise them. Despite their growing connection, both were careful. Neither rushed, neither forced the relationship to develop too quickly. They knew that the best connections were built slowly, with understanding and patience. Every meeting, every shared smile, every conversation added a small layer of depth to their growing bond. One rainy morning, similar to the day they first met, they found themselves in the cafe again. This time, they chose to sit together at the same table. The rain tapped gently against the windows, and the world outside seemed distant and unimportant. They talked for hours, sharing stories that were both serious and lighthearted. They discovered shared interests they hadn't expected: a love for old movies, fascination with history, and a quiet enjoyment of simple walks in the park. "I never thought a chance meeting could lead to this," she said quietly, almost to herself. He looked at her eyes, reflecting the same thought. "Sometimes the smallest moments turn out to be the most important," he replied. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, and more personal with each passing day. They began to notice the little details about each other: the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way he smiled softly when he was amused, the subtle gestures that revealed personality without words. These small observations created a quiet intimacy, one that didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Even when they were apart, they felt connected. A simple message, a brief note, or a thought of the other person could brighten their day. Life continued with its usual challenges, but the anticipation of seeing each other, of sharing a moment, added a new dimension to their lives. Ordinary days now had small sparks of excitement. Mundane routines felt lighter because of the shared connection. One afternoon, while sitting on a park bench under the shade of a large tree, they shared a moment of silence that spoke louder than words. They didn't need to talk about the future or define what they were feeling. The quiet understanding, the presence of each other, was enough. That moment, simple and unassuming, became a memory that would linger long after it had passed. As the days went by, their connection strengthened naturally, without forcing or rushing. Friends began to notice a subtle change in both of them: an air of contentment, a lightness in their step, a spark in their eyes. There was something different, something special about the bond they were forming, and it was impossible to ignore. Yet, even as they grew closer, both remained aware of the fragility of new relationships. They knew that life could be unpredictable, that routines could change, and that people sometimes walked in and out of our lives without warning. So they cherished every moment, every conversation, every shared laugh, knowing that the present was precious and that the future could not be assumed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city lights began to twinkle, they walked along a quiet street, side by side. There was no need for grand statements or dramatic confessions. The connection was real, steady, and undeniable. It had grown slowly, nurtured by small encounters, shared conversations, and moments of quiet understanding. And though they didn't know what the future held, they both felt a sense of hope, a feeling that something meaningful was beginning to take shape. By the end of part 2, The story had moved from a chance meeting to a series of meaningful encounters, where curiosity blossomed into a growing connection. Both of them were learning about each other, discovering shared values, and building a quiet, natural intimacy. It was a story of two ordinary people finding something extraordinary in each other, proving that even in a busy, routine-filled world, life has a way of creating moments that matter. Time seemed to stretch in unusual ways when they were together. Days which once felt heavy and repetitive now had a lightness to them. Every encounter carried a quiet excitement, a sense that something meaningful was unfolding, even in the simplest moments. By now, the young woman and the man had started to share more than small talk. They began to talk about their lives in ways they rarely did with anyone else. One afternoon, they met at a small park tucked between apartment buildings. The city around them was noisy, but the park felt like a hidden world, quiet and still. She arrived first, sitting on a bench with her coffee, watching children chase each other across the grass and listening to the faint hum of traffic. He arrived a few minutes later, smiling when he saw her. He carried a small notebook and a pen, but this time, he didn't open it. Instead, he simply sat down beside her, his presence calm and steady. They started talking about everyday things, the weather, a new bakery that had opened nearby, a book she had been reading. But soon, the conversation took a more personal turn. She found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone in a long time. She talked about her childhood, her dreams, and the small fears she carried with her every day. She spoke softly, almost as if testing the waters, unsure if she could trust someone with the thoughts she usually kept to herself. He listened carefully, not interrupting, letting her words flow. When she paused, he would offer gentle encouragement, a nod, or a soft smile. It was clear he was not only listening but genuinely interested in understanding her, in seeing her for who she truly was. That simple act of attention made her feel valued in a way she had rarely experienced. "I've always been scared, and," she admitted quietly, "that I'll put myself out there and it won't matter. That no one will really see me, not fully." He looked at her, his gaze steady and kind. "I understand that," he said. "I felt that way too. For a long time I thought it was easier to keep things inside than risk being hurt. But sometimes, sharing a part of yourself, even a small part, can change everything." His words resonated deeply. She realized that she had never truly allowed anyone to see her without a filter, without walls. But with him, it felt safe. She wanted to trust him, to let him see her as she really was. For his part, he began to share parts of his life that he had rarely spoken about. He talked about struggles at work, moments of loneliness, and times when he had doubted himself. He spoke in a calm, measured way, but the honesty in his voice was undeniable. She listened, feeling a mixture of empathy and admiration. Here was someone who had faced his own challenges and still carried a quiet strength, a resilience that inspired her. As they talked, they laughed at small memories, shared opinions on trivial things, and even debated over little preferences, tea versus coffee, morning walks versus evening strolls. But beneath the laughter and light conversation was a growing intimacy, a bond that was slowly weaving itself into the fabric of their daily lives. One evening, they decided to take a walk along a quiet street lined with old buildings and small shops. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain that had fallen earlier. They walked side by side, the silence between them comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. At one point, she stopped to look at a small flower growing in a crack between the stones. "It's amazing how life finds a way, even in the smallest places," she said. He knelt down, examining the flower with her. "It is," he agreed. "It reminds me that growth and beauty can happen even when it's unexpected, even when it seems impossible." The metaphor was not lost on either of them. Both had been hesitant, cautious, unsure of how to let someone into their lives. But like that small flower, the connection between them had begun to grow in unlikely ways, finding space in their hearts where they hadn't expected it to exist. As the weeks went by, their conversations became deeper and more meaningful. They talked about fears, dreams, and regrets. They shared moments of silence that felt full of understanding. Each time they met, they discovered something new about each other, something that made them feel closer, more connected. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves sheltering under a small awning outside a bookstore. The rain was falling steadily, and the streets were nearly empty. She laughed as a few drops hit her hair, and he offered her his umbrella, though they were both already soaked. They walked together, laughing, talking, sharing stories as if the world outside had disappeared. "I've never had someone I could talk to like this," she admitted as they paused to watch the rain. "It feels safe, somehow." He smiled softly. "I know what you mean. It's rare to find someone you can be yourself with without worrying about judgment." There was a quiet pause, a moment when words were unnecessary. They looked at each other, the city around them blurred by the rain, and felt a connection that went beyond words. It was a sense of understanding, of acceptance, of being seen in a way that both had longed for but rarely found. As their relationship grew, they began to share small routines. Coffee in the mornings, brief walks in the park, afternoons spent reading together at the cafe. It was not dramatic or rushed. It was gentle, steady, and natural. They learned to anticipate each other's moods, to offer comfort without needing to ask, to celebrate small victories and joys together. One evening, they sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline. The lights of the buildings twinkled like stars, and the night air was cool, but not uncomfortable. She leaned slightly against him, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the city, then back at her. "I try not to rush things," he said finally. "I think about today, about this moment, and how important it is. The future will come, but right now, I want to be here with you." Her heart warmed at his words. She realized that love wasn't always about grand gestures or declarations. Sometimes it was about presence, about being there for each other in simple, meaningful ways. Their bond deepened further as they shared more of their personal worlds. He introduced her to favorite places in the city she had never noticed before. A quiet bookstore with a hidden reading nook, a small bakery that made bread fresh every morning, and a secluded bench in the park that overlooked a pond. Each place became a shared memory, a testament to their growing connection. She, in turn, opened up her own world to him. She invited him to her favorite cafe, showed him the small streets she loved to walk, and shared stories from her past that shaped who she was. Each revelation brought them closer, creating a sense of intimacy that neither had expected but both cherished deeply. There were moments of vulnerability, too. One evening, as they sat in a quiet corner of the cafe, she admitted a fear she had carried for years. "I've always been scared of being alone," she said softly. "Of never finding someone who understands me, someone who really sees me." He reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "I see you, I hear you, and I want to be here with you, if you'll let me." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the relief of being understood. She realized that this connection, this bond they were forming, was something rare and precious. It wasn't just about companionship. It was about recognition, acceptance, and the courage to be vulnerable. As the days turned into weeks, their relationship continued to grow in quiet, meaningful ways. They didn't need to rush, didn't need to define every moment. They simply existed together, sharing experiences, supporting each other, and discovering the depth of connection that could come from truly seeing and understanding another person. One evening, after a long day, they walked along a quiet street with the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement. She stopped and looked at him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I never imagined meeting someone like you," she said. "Someone who makes ordinary moments feel special." He smiled, a soft, genuine smile. "I never imagined it either," he replied. "But here we are, and I'm grateful for it every day." They walked in silence for a while, enjoying the peacefulness of the night and the quiet presence of each other. It was a comfort they both had been searching for, a sense of belonging that neither had found elsewhere. By the end of part 3, their connection had moved beyond curiosity and initial attraction. They had started to share vulnerabilities, personal histories, and dreams. They had built trust, understanding, and a growing intimacy that was both natural and profound. Their bond was becoming stronger, deeper, and more meaningful with every passing day. Laying the foundation for the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead, the days of quiet joy and gentle connection began to change. Almost imperceptibly at first, life, as it often does, started to introduce challenges that tested the strength of the bond they had been building. Nothing dramatic happened overnight, but small pressures began to appear: work deadlines, family expectations, and lingering fears from their past. Each challenge was subtle, yet each carried the potential to create tension, uncertainty, and doubt. It started with work. The young woman had been given a major project at her job, one that required long hours and complete focus. She found herself exhausted at the end of each day, barely able to think beyond her responsibilities. The man noticed her fatigue when they met at the cafe one afternoon. She smiled, as she always did, but he could see the strain in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, and the way her hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee cup. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice quiet but filled with concern. "I'm fine," she said, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just busy, that's all." He didn't push her further, but he stayed with her, offering quiet support and a listening ear whenever she needed it. He understood that sometimes presence mattered more than words, that simply being there could provide comfort even when life felt overwhelming. Meanwhile, he was facing his own challenges. He had been working on a project that required him to travel frequently. Each trip took him away from the city, away from the routine that had slowly become a shared rhythm with her. They started wandering through the market together, stopping at small stalls to admire fresh flowers, fruits, and handmade crafts. The simplicity of the moment was beautiful. They didn't need to speak constantly. The shared presence was enough. Every small gesture, holding a bag for her while she examined a jar of jam, offering her a taste of fresh bread, brushing away a stray hair from her face, felt meaningful and intentional. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked quietly as they paused to watch a street performer playing a gentle melody on a violin. He looked at her, soft smile on his face. "All the time," he said. "I think about how a simple moment in a cafe led to this. It's strange to think that everything started with just a small accident, a fallen notebook." She laughed softly. "It feels like more than that now. It feels like fate, in a way. Like the universe had a plan for us even when we didn't know it." He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Maybe it did. Or maybe we just chose to see what was there and to grow it together. Either way, I'm grateful we did." The day unfolded gently, full of small joys and shared discoveries. They lingered at a flower stall, picking out a few blooms to take home, and laughed at the bright colors that reminded them of spring, even though it was late autumn. At a small bakery, they shared a pastry and coffee, leaning close to each other, enjoying the warmth of connection that had become second nature. After leaving the market, they decided to walk to the park where they had spent so many quiet afternoons. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Children were playing in the distance, dogs running freely, and the air was filled with the gentle rustle of leaves. It was here, in this familiar place, that the depth of their bond felt most palpable. They found their favorite bench overlooking the pond, a spot where they had shared conversations, confessions, and moments of silence that spoke volumes. She leaned slightly against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I can't believe how much has changed since that first day," she said softly. He kissed the top of her head gently. "I can," he replied. "I remember it vividly. The rain, the cafe, the spilled notebook. And yet even that small moment held the potential for something so much bigger." They sat together in silence for a while, letting the peace of the park, the soft chirping of birds, and the distant laughter of children fill the space between them. It was a comfortable, contented silence, one that only comes when two people feel fully understood and accepted by each other. As evening approached, they stood and began walking along a quiet path. The city lights were beginning to twinkle, reflecting in the water and creating a gentle shimmer. It was the kind of moment that felt timeless. a pause in the rush of life that allowed them to simply exist together. He stopped suddenly, taking both her hands in his. She looked up at him, sensing the seriousness in his gaze. "I want to say something," he began, his voice steady but soft. "Something I've felt for a long time, and something I think I've always known, even from the very first moment we met." Her heart raced, a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. She nodded, encouraging him to continue without needing to speak. "I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone," he said. "These months, every conversation, every walk, every quiet moment, has shown me what it means to truly connect with someone. I don't want to imagine life without you in it. I want us to keep building this together, no matter what comes our way." She felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the honesty, the vulnerability, and the depth of feeling in his words. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I've never felt so seen, so understood. You've changed the way I see life, and you've made it better just by being here." He smiled, relief and joy shining in his eyes. "Then let's promise something," he said, his voice earnest. "Let's promise to be there for each other, to support each other, and to face whatever life brings together. Not because it will be easy, but because it will be worth it." She nodded, her own smile bright despite the tears. "I promise," she said. They embraced a long, heartfelt hug that carried the weight of months of connection, growth, and understanding. It was a physical expression of the emotional bond that had been forming slowly, beautifully, and irreversibly. As night fell, they walked home together, the city lights guiding their way. They talked about future plans, dreams, and possibilities, but without pressure or expectation. There was a sense of excitement, yes, but also a deep calm that came from knowing they had found something rare and precious. In the following weeks, their lives began to intertwine even more. They shared routines, celebrated small victories, and supported each other through minor setbacks. A walk in the park, a quiet coffee in the morning, or a shared joke became markers of their growing intimacy. Each moment reinforced the sense that they were not just connected by chance, but by choice, by the conscious decision to nurture and protect what they had found. Friends noticed a change too. The young woman seemed lighter, more at ease, carrying herself with a quiet confidence and joy that hadn't been there before. He seemed calmer, happier, and more present, as if the connection they shared had given him a new perspective on life. Their bond became a quiet inspiration to those around them, a reminder of the power of love, patience, and mutual respect. There were still challenges, of course. Life rarely gives love without testing it in small ways. Work obligations, unexpected events, and everyday stresses continued to appear. But now, they faced these moments together, as a team. They had learned to communicate openly, trust each other, and find comfort in shared vulnerability. What had once felt like obstacles now felt like opportunities to grow closer, to strengthen the foundation of their relationship. One weekend, they decided to revisit the cafe where it all began. The same table by the window awaited them, quiet and familiar. They ordered coffee and sat together, reminiscing about their first encounter, the spilled notebook, and the awkward yet charming conversation that had started everything. "It's amazing," she said, smiling, "how something so small led to something so big." He nodded, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It's incredible," he agreed, "and it makes me believe in the little moments, in the small choices, in the chance encounters that change everything." They spent the afternoon there, sharing laughter, dreams, and quiet reflection. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about presence, connection, the steady growth of something real and lasting as the sun set. Painting the sky with soft colors, they walked out of the cafe together. The streets were familiar, yet each corner felt new when seen through the lens of shared experience. They talked about plans for the future, not rigid plans, but hopes, possibilities, and small adventures they wanted to explore together. At that moment, they understood that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about grand declarations or flawless timing. It was about showing up, supporting each other, and finding joy in both the extraordinary and ordinary moments. It was about choosing each other again and again through life's challenges and joys alike. By the end of part 5, their story had come full circle. From an accidental meeting in a cafe to meaningful walks, shared vulnerabilities, and tests of trust. They had discovered a love that was real, resilient, and deeply human. They had learned that love required patience, understanding, and courage, and that true connection could grow even in the midst of life's unpredictability. In the quiet of that evening, walking side by side with the city lights reflecting in their eyes, they felt a sense of completeness. They didn't need to know exactly what the future held. They only knew that, together, they were ready to face it. The journey that began with a spilled notebook and a shared smile had grown into something extraordinary, enduring connection, a commitment to one another, and a reminder that love, in its purest form, could transform ordinary moments into memories that would last a lifetime. And so, their story, full of chance, courage, and choice, continued not as a fleeting encounter, but as a testament to what can happen when two people open their hearts, embrace vulnerability, and choose to grow together. Every shared laugh, every quiet conversation, every moment of understanding had led them to this point. And in that point, they had found something truly rare, a love worth cherishing forever.